Now in a chapter that I have alluded to many times, Leviticus 25. Leviticus in 25 and 26 are one of the more important chapters in the Bible. I like to remember things by chapters, and I like people to remember things by chapters. If you can remember what chapter it's in, you can remember the verses. You'll find it. I know that the covenant with Abraham is described in Genesis 12, 15, and 17. I know that because I memorized chapters. Okay. I know that Exodus 20 and 34 contain two statements of the Ten Commandments. In general, I know that Leviticus 1 to 9 contains the outlines of the major sacrifices, and chapter 10 is the destruction of Nadab and Abihu, and 11 to 15 is the manual of purification, and 16 finishes that up with the purification of the sanctuary on the Day of Atonement. And what is 17 to 26? The Holiness Code, yes. Now what's interesting about this Holiness Code, nearly all scholars include chapters 25 and 26 in the Holiness Code, and indeed, as the book now stands, it is the conclusion of that code. Without 25 and 26, you don't have any end to it. Nevertheless, 25 and 26 are a literary unit unto themselves. Okay? They originally stood alone. All right? Now I want to say something about the Holiness Code. I am Yahweh your God. 50 times in the Holiness Code as a conclusion to laws not found elsewhere. It's found in the Holiness Code, not elsewhere, not even elsewhere in Leviticus. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you, or I am Yahweh who sanctifies them, 7 times. Not found elsewhere in Leviticus, found twice in Ezekiel and once in Exodus, in a verse in Exodus where it looks like it was edited, not original to Exodus apparently. Twice in Ezekiel. Nowhere else but in the Holiness Code, not elsewhere in Leviticus. This word translated neighbor. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, meaning another Israelite. 11 times in the Holiness Code, not elsewhere in Leviticus and not elsewhere in the Old Testament, but once in a gloss, probably from a priest. Okay? It's found nowhere else in the Bible, used in this way. It's not found elsewhere in Leviticus. It's one of the ways that we know that the Holiness Code is a literary unit unto itself. Unlike the rest of Leviticus. My Sabbaths. Of all the times that Sabbaths are mentioned, only my Sabbaths in the Holiness Code 3 times. Interestingly. Found 10 times in Ezekiel. Nowhere else. Now why again the close affinities between the Holiness Code and the book of Ezekiel? Ezekiel was strongly priestly literature. Yes. Yes, things of nothing, meaning idols. A phrase found throughout the book of Isaiah, found in the Holiness Code and nowhere else in the Bible. How about this one? His blood shall be upon him, their blood shall be upon them. 6 times. Found in Ezekiel only as a quote of the laws in the Holiness Code. Nowhere else in the Pentateuch, certainly nowhere else in Leviticus itself. Alright, so what can we say about the Holiness Code? That it's more like itself than anything else in the Bible. That is to say, it's a literary unit. The Holiness Code is more like itself than the rest of Leviticus. It uses a bunch of phrases, it has a bunch of meanings for technical terms that are not found elsewhere in Leviticus, and aren't found elsewhere in the Bible except, with possible editing, except in the book of Ezekiel. Okay? It is a literary unit. Okay? 17 to 26 is a literary unit. However, when we come to this opening passage in 25, although chapters 25 and 26 now stand as the conclusion to the code, they weren't that originally. Originally, they were a piece in and of themselves. Now, can you tell me in the Holiness Code which chapter formed the original core? Who was awake enough to catch that? Of these chapters, which chapter was the original core? The original code around which the whole thing grew up? If you get this, you get a gold star on your forehead. Chapter 19, that's exactly right. That's it. That was the original code right there. The original Decalogue around which the rest of the laws were expansions. That's right. Now, what was the setting of the code as it now stands? We have to go back to 17 and begin at verse 1 and read it again. It says, Yahweh said to Moses, "Say to Aaron and his sons and to all the people of Israel, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded if any man of the house of Israel goes to the law of blood." So what was the original setting of the code? It was Yahweh speaking to whom? To Moses. We have to make a guess and an assumption now. Where? Under what circumstances? As the book of Leviticus now flows, where is this speaking going on? In the tabernacle where?
Inside the gate.
Yeah, it's not Moses' tent, it's the sanctuary. Where in the sanctuary?
In the
most holy place above the ark, right? Okay. As the book is now constructed, when the glory of Yahweh descended from the mountain and it went into the sanctuary, then Moses' special office as covenant mediator ceased. Do you remember that? That special office by which Moses was designated in Exodus ceased. And Moses was demoted from covenant mediator to what? To priest with Aaron. And he spoke to Moses and Aaron out of the sanctuary, right? And Moses becomes, at the end of the book of Exodus, part of the sanctuary system. And it's through the sanctuary that God speaks to Moses and Aaron and to Israel, through them. And they are pictured as together. Moses isn't special. Of course, you would expect that in Levitical literature, because when we say Levitical literature here, which priestly family is really represented? The Aaronite priesthood, yes. That is what makes, and all the way through, it's the Lord speaking to Moses in the context of the narrative out of the most holy place of the sanctuary as the priestly mediator. That's what makes chapter 25 and 26 so noticeable. How does it begin? Oh yes, it's so dramatic. You're shocked when you read it. Yahweh said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Say to the people of Israel." This is an old literary unit that goes back to the days when Moses is what? The covenant mediator, and the Lord is speaking to him where? On Sinai. And what's Aaron's role in all this? Yes. Remember, we saw this in Exodus 32. This is that sequence where Moses is all and Aaron is the one who's in trouble. Right? That's very interesting. There's the introduction. Is there a conclusion to match this introduction about on Mount Sinai? Well, chapter 25 and 26 go together, of course. But what do we have at the end of chapter 26? Verse 46, how does it read? "These are the statutes and ordinances and laws which Yahweh made between him and the people of Israel on Mount Sinai by Moses. This introduction and conclusion doesn't fit well with the Holiness Code, does it? Comes at the wrong time and place. Okay? The thing is, where was that transfer made again? Where Moses was demoted to co-priest, and where all the revelation came through the sanctuary. Where did that happen? No, that hasn't even happened yet. At the dedication of the sanctuary. Where is that? Literarily. Where is that?
Just about the end of Exodus.
Yes, the end of Exodus. It's not even in Leviticus.
Yeah, 40:34. Isn't that covered in
Yes. Here's the demotion of Moses. After all about Moses seeing God's glory, seeing him face to face, we have 40:34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. It comes down from Mount Sinai. There's no more covenant mediator. It enters the sanctuary, and Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud abode upon it, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. This is quite a shift from Moses, who was up there 40 days and 40 nights and saw the glory of God, and no man was able to approach Moses, and they had to put a veil over his face, so forth. Here we have where Moses becomes part of the sanctuary system. Moses is absorbed into the sanctuary system, into the cult, and he's not treated as separate or special after that.
Is that the actual fact the way it happened, or is this the way it's come down after the Levitical famine?
Did Moses get demoted at that point to the point of not being able to? Yes. Except for Leviticus 25 and 26.
27 ends the same way.
Oh, that's for a different reason, though. Why does 27 end the same way? 27 is the appendix that has been displaced out of the code. Chapter 26 is the end of the book of Leviticus. Chapter 27 is something that fell out. And when they added again, these scrolls kept falling apart. When they added chapter 27 at the end, what was the editor duty bound to do?
And the book.
Repeat the conclusion, which is, these are the commandments which Yahweh commanded Moses and the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. The conclusion is forced by the position of chapter 27. Except for these chapters, which are misplaced literarily. And now I'm talking about the difference between the literary construction as we now have it, and what the evidence suggests is that Moses becomes part of the cult when? When the cult is founded and dedicated, Moses became part of the cult, became part of the sanctuary system, and we don't have Moses going up to the mountain to speak with God separate from Israel anymore again. We don't see it in Numbers, we don't see it in Deuteronomy. It ends with the founding of the sanctuary. These chapters stand out of place in that structure.
It is because Moses really was a go-between, and so to build a sanctuary was to bring God so that God could dwell among them.
That's right. Until the sanctuary, God isn't with them because there's no way for the holy God to be among them without destroying them. That's the theology of the sanctuary. But as so somebody from Israel, to wit Moses, representing Israel, has to go up and talk to God. With the founding of the sanctuary, the idea is that became unnecessary. Therefore, that special office and function ceases, and Moses becomes part of the sanctuary system.
That doesn't make sense, though.
What?
Because Moses' tent of meeting outside the camp continues right through the Exodus.
Yes, but Moses' tent of meeting is a different tradition with a different theology that isn't addressed in Exodus and Leviticus as it now stands.
I understand, but he continues to meet with the Lord face to face throughout the 40 years.
Yes, according to that tent of meeting story that we're going to find again in Numbers, the tent of meeting that Moses had outside the camp because God didn't want to come into the camp lest he destroy them, continued.
That was really behind the question I was asking too. Because that continues throughout, so you have two conflicting conditions here.
That's true. The one that's more consistent is the one I stick with the Aaronites. The one that's more consistent is God was outside the camp. The sanctuary made it possible for him to come in. He came in. Moses' special mediatorial office was no longer necessary.
And yet he continued in that role through the Exodus. It was Moses again and again who stood between God and the people.
Yeah, in the stories in Numbers, where there's a tent of meeting that Moses goes out. The narratives in the book of Numbers, based on the theology that Moses is the covenant mediator and he has to go out to speak to God separate from Israel, are consistent with Moses' tent of meeting. They're not consistent with the theology taught at the end of the book of Exodus or in the book of Leviticus.
And yet we agreed earlier that these are probably coterminous stories, meaning that there was probably both a sanctuary
I
in
believe
the center
that.
of the camp.
Yes, I believe that for special reasons. Yes, I believe that for.
Each of them is chipping at the other without telling the whole truth.
Yes, I think that each tradition is telling part of the story without telling the whole story.
Well, one seems more glorified than the other.
Which one?
The one with the ceremony of going into the sanctuary and the building of the sanctuary rather than him being in the tent of meeting seems more crude than...
His tent of meeting, Moses' tent of meeting seems more crude,
Yeah.
where God came down and talked to him in the tent.
Yeah.
It would have seemed more crude unless you were a descendant of. Because those tent shrines that the Mushite family kept, they were keeping why? They were saying what? If you come to this tent shrine of the Mosaic family, what are you coming to? You're coming to a place where God speaks just as he did in the Exodus to Moses and just as he passed on to the family of Moses. Okay? That's what Heber the Kenite and his good wife Jael were doing, keeping a tent shrine up there outside the Canaanite city of Hazor. By the way, when the Mushite family kept these tent shrines alive outside the Canaanite cities, what older tradition did they appeal to? We have a couple more chairs in the other room if you want to. Okay.
You coming back to the household, John?
Now, think about Genesis now. What did the patriarchs do? Where did Abraham go when he went from place to place within the land of Canaan? He wasn't just wandering around. Where did he go?
Various high places.
To the various sacred places, right? To the high places. And he pitched his tent by the sacred oak, right? Now, when the Mushite family pitched its tents by the sacred oaks, what was it saying? That the covenant that was committed to Moses was a continuation of the Abrahamic covenant, right? Stop looking bemused.
And they lived in tents, as did their father Abraham.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas, what did?
And wagged their fingers at the city dwellers.
But where did the Aaronite priests live? Where did the Aaronite priests live?
In the temples and the high places in the city.
In the cities. Yes. The Aaronite priests, and you only need to read the list of Levitical cities to see it, the Aaronite priests lived in the cities. And the Mushite priests, without exception, lived outside the cities in the wilderness. And so, of these two, characterize which family you would have called conservative had you been living at the time. Which would have been considered the more conservative priesthood? The Moshites, of course, because they followed the tradition of living in the tents outside the cities, going all the way back to Abraham, an older tradition, whereas the Levitical priests were building temples, which was a distinctly Canaanite idea. You can see why so many conservatives did not like the idea of David building a temple, and indeed did not like the idea of Solomon building a temple, because what? Thoroughly Canaanite idea. It didn't help any that the temple was patterned after Canaanite temples and had lots of Canaanite features. That didn't help any either.
I thought this plan was inspired.
Yes. The Bible is, yes, the Word of God. It's the mingling of the divine and the human. God isn't represented as an author. That God speaks in the language of men. That God speaks of the time and the place and the background of the men involved. I'm quoting Mrs. White now. So yes, when the time came when people best understood the worship of God through temples, what happened? He ordered a temple. But inevitably, while the great majority of the people responded to that best, there's always a certain number of people called conservatives who what? Who found that distinctly inappropriate.
Go back to your roots.
Yes. Now, how did we get into this? We got into this because Leviticus 25 and 26 are a piece of temple liturgy made for covenant renewal ceremonies that goes back to the time of Moses on Mount Sinai. Okay? That has been taken out of its original context. If you ask me where in Exodus and Leviticus was its original context, I'd have to say what? I don't know. I don't know. Neither does any other scholar. There's many different proposals as there are scholars, which tells you we don't know. All right? And it has been put here to serve as an appropriate conclusion to the Holiness Code. It ends with the blessings and the curses of keeping the covenant or not keeping the covenant. It is an appropriate conclusion where it stands now, and all we have is the text as it stands. Anybody have a question now about that before we move forward? The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, say to the people of Israel, quote, when you come into the land which I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to Yahweh. Now the syntax of this should immediately strike you, and catch the syntax and tell me where you recognize it from. 6 days you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. What grows of itself in your harvest you shall not reap, and the grapes of your undressed vine you shall not gather. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, for yourself, and your male and female slaves, and for your hired servant, and the sojourner who lives with you, for your cattle also, and for all the beasts that are in your land, all its yield shall be for food. It strikes you immediately. What is it? It's the structure of the elaboration of the fourth commandment as it's found in the Decalogue, as we now have it in Exodus 20. 6 days you shall do this and this and this, but in the 7th day you keep a Sabbath and you don't do this and this and this. You or da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's exactly the same structure. And you see the obvious relationship between the Sabbath commandment as elaborated in the Decalogue. Hey, future time, is it in front of you or behind you?
Behind me.
Future time.
Behind me, because I've seen it.
Yes, now you're thinking biblically. And in modern Western thought, what is it? The future lies in front of us, right? And what is past is what? That's behind us. It's all behind us now. Let's put it behind us. Don't we say that? Let's put it behind us.
It's gone.
Right? Let's put it behind us. So we're headed in what direction? We're head forward into the unknown. In cyclic time, you don't head forward into the unknown. You pass around the cycle looking backwards so that you know what's already happened, so that you know what's going to come. That's why in biblical language you all, and we don't think about this, but we're so familiar with the Bible that we do it. What is the future? Daniel, what is the future? The days hereafter. The future is what's after us, and what? The past lies. The past lies before us. How do we know what Solomon did? Isn't it all before us? Before means in front of. Okay? Again, let's talk about linear and cyclic time again. Right? Here's our timeline. That's linear time, right? Linear just meaning a line. We'll go by 500 years. Moses, 1500. David, 1000. Daniel, 500. Christ, beginning of the modern era. 500 AD, we'll say the setting up of the papacy. 1000 AD, the Romanesque cathedrals. Everybody expected Christ to come again. 1500, Martin Luther, the Reformation's beginning. 2000, the turn of the century. Now, what do we know about each of these points in time? We know that if you're here, we take this for granted, if you're here, what? You are not anywhere else. It is a given that now is not then. Here is not there. That's a given. That's the presumption. I'm not sure that modern physics would necessarily say that was true. Right?
Right.
All right. Now is not then. Here is not there. Right? That's true of linear time. But what happens when time becomes a cycle? Then what? Well, here it might be in the past, but what else might it be? It might be in the future, too. Why did the Old Testament have a much more pronounced emphasis on cyclic time than linear time?
Because their history was their future.
But why did they think that way?
Because of history.
Just because of the cycles of nature.
Well, initially because of the cycles of nature. What cycles might you suggest? What are some cycles? Seed time and harvest. Okay. The agrarian cycle is what you just said. There's a time to plant, and a time to sow, and a time to reap. Right? What else?
Sanctuary service.
Well, the sanctuary service in Leviticus 23 that we went through last time is the agrarian cycle. What do? You celebrate to the Lord when you plant the harvest, and you celebrate to the Lord when you bring in the harvest, and it's the agrarian cycle. That's all it is. It's a cycle. What else?
The daily cycle.
The daily cycle. What is that? Evening and morning, light and darkness, the endless. And as soon as you say the daily cycle, then what else do you have to say? What is actually circling? The sun. As far as the ancient mind is concerned, what's happening? It is literally a cycle. Why? Because in the ancient mind, the sun is doing what? Making a circle. Right? So evening and morning, the cycle of the day is literally a cycle of the ancient mind. What else? Then we have the day. What else? Let's go from the day to what? Well, we don't skip to the month. Yes, remember that the Babylonians observed the Saturday Sabbath. Let's keep that in mind, that in the ancient world there was a weekly cycle. Right? The other ancient cultures knew about a week. There's a lot of scholarly debate about how they knew about a week, but there was a week. Okay? And then from the week, what? Then there's the lunar cycle. The moon's moving around too. And so you come to the months. And the lunar cycle of the months. And it was the lunar cycle that created the months in the ancient mind, wasn't it? Because what was the term for the month? The new moon. Right? Alright, so there was the monthly cycle. Then there was the cycle of how many months? 7 months, right? 7 months.